can invite your friends to tune in also. And let me adjust something here. Okay, so a little off center. All right, so I wanted to talk about this story, and I saw an article. Well, I've seen a number of articles dealing with Vicente Guerrero. I've read about him in the past, but I wanted to deal with this topic. This is a really, really great story, and this deals with history, and it deals with the first African president of Mexico. Okay, his name was Vicente Guerrero. I recently saw an article about him from face-to-faceafrica.com. Face-to-faceafrica.com had an article January 1st, 2020. But I've read about him in the past, and Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. had a good article about him in the series that he did for the root.com, dealing with 100 amazing facts about the Negro. 100 amazing facts about the Negro. Okay. So we're going to talk about that. So Vicente Guerrero was the first Black president of Mexico. He became president in 1829, and he abolished slavery. And he also fought for the rights of Afro-Mexicans. All right. How's everybody doing? How you doing? Daryl, May, Knockout, just a few of the people watching. Everybody share this broadcast. And be sure to follow us on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. And also follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Okay. All right. The reason why information like this is so important is because a lot of people, because the Rio Grande is the border between the U.S. and Mexico, a lot of people don't understand U.S.-Mexican relations going back 170 years or even before then. And these tensions between the U.S. and Mexico are going to lead to the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, which ends with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, February 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ends the Mexican-American War. And it's going to, the U.S. is going to end up getting the territories that become California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada because of this treaty, okay? But before that, we have Vicente Guerrero, all right? So just give me a second here. Let me share this broadcast. And then also African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast, and we'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. A current promotion, buy 1 month, get 2 months free. Buy 1 month, get 2 months free. Okay. All right. So if we look at this article from, this is one from The Root a few years ago, back in 2012, from Henry Louis Gates Jr., North America's first Black president, North America's first Black president. Also, blackpast.org has a really good article dealing with Vicente Guerrero as well. He was born in, some sources say 1782, some sources say 1783, okay? And he was born to, his father was believed to be a former slave. He was this, but Vicente Guerrero was despairingly nicknamed El Negro Guerrero, by his political enemies. And he would, and according to one of his biographers, Theodore G. Vincent, Guerrero was of mixed African, Spanish, and Native American ancestry. Okay, mixed African, Spanish, and Native American ancestry. And his African ancestry most probably derived from his father. His father's name was Juan Pedro. And his father was a mule driver. Okay. His father's profession, quote, was in the almost entirely Afro-Mexican profession of mule driver. Now, some scholars speculate that his paternal grandfather was either a slave or a descendant of African slaves. Okay, so we know that Mexico was conquered by Spain, and we know that the Spanish are taking Africans into Mexico and enslaving them. All right. If we look at the article from face-to-faceafrica.com, it is recorded that in the 16th century, New Spain, which was what Mexico was called at one point, New Spain had the largest number of African slaves of all of the Americas. A 1595 census showed that Afro-Mexicans outnumbered Spain, and mestizos, MESTIZOS. The mestizos were persons of indigenous and Spanish mixed descent. Indigenous and Spanish mixed descent. Okay, so when they talk about indigenous descent, largely they're referring to Native Americans. Okay, so you're having the European Spanish who are conquering what we call Mexico, intermixing also with the Native American population. And there are going to be some Africans who were there as well. There are going to be some Africans who were already there before Africans were brought in as slaves. Okay, so you're going to have these different populations, and you're going to have about 250,000 Africans taken into what we call Mexico. So Vicente Guerrero was a descendant of about 250,000 enslaved Africans brought to Mexico during colonial times. So he was born on August 9th, 1783 in Tixla, Tixtla, now the state of Guerrero in Mexico. Some sources say he was born in 1782, all right? So now by 1646, the numbers had increased of Africans who were taken into Mexico had increased to 116,529 for Afro-Mexicans, I should say. By 1646, the number had increased to 116,529 for Afro-Mexicans and 35,089 for Africans. So growing up without a formal education, Vicente Guerrero took to farming and later became the mule driver transporting goods. He eventually became one of the few great figures who fought for independence throughout the entire period of 1810 to 1821. It has been documented that with his knowledge of native languages, he was able to rise in rank, okay? And Mexico is going to win its independence from Spain in 1821, okay? It's going to be in 1821. All right, now, so Vicente Guerrero joined the fight for Mexico's independence from Spain in 1810 under the leadership of another Black man who was also a mulatto, or what they refer to as mulatto. You'll see that referred to. You'll see that term used oftentimes. Now, it's looked at as a derogatory term, but this is the term that at various periods of time, that may be the term that was used. So the other Black man who, when Vicente Guerrero joins Mexico's fight for independence against Spain in 1810, the leader of that fight was another Black man named General Jose Maria Morelos, Morelos. He was a Catholic priest who played the dominant leadership role in the war until he was killed in combat in 1815. So Morelos, like Vicente Guerrero, is one of Mexico's greatest heroes. His face graces the the 50 peso bill, and a Mexican state is also named for him. So within a year of Morelos' death, Vicente Guerrero became a general of the rebels, fighting guerrilla skirmishes until Mexico was granted its independence in 1821. All right. So contrary to popular belief, Cinco de Mayo is not Mexico's Independence Day. I know people like to I know African Americans like to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Not exactly sure why, but that's not Mexico's Independence Day. So Guerrero ran twice for president, once in 1824 and again in 1828, both times unsuccessfully. He claimed foul play in running for president, and Guerrero and his supporters rebelled. They toppled the new government, and Vicente Guerrero became president on April 1st, 1829. April 1st, 1829. So on September 16th, 1829, later in that same year, September 16th is Mexico's Independence Day. September 16th, 1829, which is Mexico's Independence Day, Guerrero abolished slavery throughout the country. Okay, so he's going to abolish slavery. He's of African ancestry, and he's going to abolish slavery. And this has led many historians to refer to him as the Abraham Lincoln of Mexico. Though Abraham Lincoln more properly should be referred to as the Vicente Guerrero of the United States. Okay, this is what Gates said, because Vicente Guerrero comes before Abraham Lincoln. All right, if you understand this chronology, we're talking about 1829. Vicente Guerrero abolishes slavery before Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, even though that didn't abolish slavery, we know is going to eventually lead to that taking place. This was during the Civil War, January 1st, 1863. And Lincoln is also going to sign the 13th Amendment as well after it passes Congress. He's going to sign the 13th Amendment also. And then we know he's assassinated April 14th, 1865 at the Ford Theater, and dies the following morning. So when we continue looking at Vicente Guerrero, and I'm referring to my notes here, so just give me a minute. All right, so it's more accurate to refer to Abraham Lincoln as the Vicente Guerrero of the United States. And this action, by the way, was part of the reason that Texas fought to secede from Mexico a few years later in 1836. So Texas wins its independence in 1836 from Mexico. Texas becomes an independent republic. And you're going to have the skirmishes over territory, over land, things like this. And what's interesting is that 1836, slavery is going on in Texas. The Texas Rangers are going to be formed in 1836. The Texas Rangers start out as bounty hunters who were sent into Mexico to capture runaway slaves that ran away from Texas into Mexico. Okay. There was an article from, I think it was pri.org. I think it was poi.org, or it was one of them that I saw, because I did a broadcast that talked about this when I dealt with, in the 1930s, the U.S. deported 1.8 million people of Mexican ancestry back to Mexico, and 60% of them were Mexican Americans who were here legally, it's estimated. This was during the 1930s, during the Great Depression. And it was said that the Mexicans were taking jobs away from white people. Okay. So they deported them, right? So there's a long history. A lot of these arguments that are taking place today, there's a long history behind these arguments. And a lot of these disputes are over land, a lot of hatred that Europeans will have towards Mexicans, things like this. It's historic, okay? It didn't start with Trump. He just exacerbated a lot of it. There's an article from history.com. The U.S. deported 1 million of its own citizens to Mexico during the Great Depression. Up to 1.8 million people of Mexican descent, most of them American born, were rounded up in informal raids and deported in an effort to reserve jobs for white people. Now, this is history.com. This is the official website of the History Channel. This article is from July 12, 2019. In the 1930s, the Los Angeles Welfare Department decided to start deporting hospital patients of Mexican descent. One of the patients was a woman with leprosy who was driven out of the, one of the patients was a woman with leprosy who was driven just over the border and left in Mexicali, Mexico. Others had tuberculosis, paralysis, mental illness, or problems related to old age. But that did not stop orderlies from carrying them out of medical institutions and sending them out of the country. This is in the 1930s. So this is during the Great Depression. The stock market crash, 1929. Early 1930s, Herbert Hoover is president. Then President Franklin D. Roosevelt is going to become president in the 1932 presidential election. These were the repatriation drives, a series of informal raids that took place around the United States during the Great Depression. Local governments and officials deported up to 1.8 million people to Mexico, according to research conducted by Joseph Dunn, D-U-N-N, a former California state senator. Joseph Dunn estimates about 60% of these people were actually American citizens, many of them born in the US to first-generation immigrants. For these citizens, deportation wasn't quote-unquote repatriation, it was exile from their own country. The logic behind these raids was that Mexican immigrants were supposedly using resources and working jobs that should go to white Americans affected by the Great Depression. These deportations happen not only in border states like California and Texas, which was Mexican territory, but also in places like Michigan, Colorado, Illinois, Ohio, and New York. In 2003, a Detroit-born US citizen named Jose Lopez testified before a California legislative committee about his family's 1931 deportation to a state, to part of Western Mexico, okay? So when we look at 1836, we see the Texas Rangers being formed. So the Texas Rangers are the state police now, right? And we know they're historic, and you have movies about the Texas Rangers and things like this, but they started out as bounty hunters to capture runaway slaves going into Mexico, because Mexico was free territory in 1836, because Vicente Guerrero abolished slavery in 1829. There's a deep history here. Okay, we'll continue here in just a minute. Let's see who we have on. How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your social media pages. Invite your friends to tune in as well. If you'd like this type of information, also, you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. And then also we have Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App. Okay. So that helps support the African History Network, helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, finance our Sunday night show. I'll be speaking in Chicago Saturday, February 15th at the Black Mall, the Ujuba Marketplace at Chicago State University, organized by the Black Mall. It's taking place 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Saturday, February 15th, 2020. So I'll be one of the speakers there. This is for African American History Month. I'll be a vendor as well. It's free and open to the public. Visit theblackmall.com, theblackmall.com for more information. We also have the information at our website, africanhistorynetwork.com, africanhistorynetwork.com as well. Okay. And then Sunday, February 16th, I'll be speaking in Detroit at St. Francis Missionary Baptist Church, 7021 West Warren Avenue, for the African American History Month program. That's taking place 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. In Detroit. We have that at our website as well. All right. Somebody said it's cold in Chicago. Well, yeah, it's cold in Chicago, but I'm from Detroit, so we kind of used to the cold. It's colder in Chicago, but I'm not You know, I'm kind of used to the code though. I've been in Detroit 49 years, so I'm kind of used to the code. All right, let's continue here. And then also email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. African American business owners will let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Okay. All right, let's continue. So this is a deep, rich history. And this is why, you know, people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past in the present and the future to meet the needs of the community. All right. And you've heard me say before, what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So, if we look at blackpast.org has a good article about Vicente Guerrero as well. So Guerrero fought for the rights of Afro-Mexicans. There was a plan known as El Plan de Iguala, El Plan de Iguala. And this plan gave civil rights to Indians, but not Afro-Mexicans. Vicente Guerrero refused to sign this plan unless equal rights were also given to Afro-Mexicans and mulattoes. Clause 12 of this plan was then incorporated. Okay, Clause 12 was then incorporated into this plan. And Clause 12 stated, quote, all inhabitants without distinction of their European, African, or Indian origins are citizens with full freedom to pursue their livelihoods according to their merits and virtues, end quote. So subsequently, Vicente Guerrero served in what was known as a three-person junta, Junta. It was a form of government, and it's a form of government that results oftentimes like after a revolution. One definition of a junta, Junta, is a military or political group that rules a country after taking power by force. So he governed in a three-person junta, and that in this three-person junta governed the then independent Mexico from 1823 to 1824 until the election that brought into power the first president of Mexico, who was Guadalupe Victoria. That was the first president of Mexico, Guadalupe Victoria. Vicente Guerrero was going to be the second president of Mexico. Now, one source I saw said, some people say he was the third president of Mexico, but most sources that I see say he was the second president of Mexico. So Vicente Guerrero, as head of the People's Party called for public schools, land title reforms, and other programs of a liberal nature. Guerrero was elected the second president of Mexico in 1829. As President Guerrero went on to champion the cause not only of the racially oppressed, but also of the economically oppressed, okay? Not only of the racially oppressed, but also of the economically oppressed. We know that about, so 1829, we know that 1846 to 1848, you're going to have the Mexican-American War, okay? And the Mexican-American War, as I stated in the beginning, that is going to end with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, okay? And that is going to, this is how the U.S. is going to get over like 500, something like 500,000 square miles of land. Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Utah, Nevada, all that, the Wyoming territory, all that's going to come from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And that was signed, I think it was February of 1848. And it's going to be shortly after that treaty that gold is going to be discovered in California, okay? So when you see tension, February 2nd, 1848, yeah, when you see tensions between the U.S. and Mexico, we have to understand those tensions go back over 170 some odd years, something like that. This stuff is not new. Okay, so you really, really have to understand history and understand how we see history in the headlines, how historical events that happened decades ago influence what's taking place today and will influence the future as well. All right, let's continue here. Let's see who we have here. We got Linda, Libra, Mr. Tyrone, Ancient, May, W. Canty, Sandra Yancey Smith. Okay, just a few of the people watching. I started looking at the Mexican-American War because of Donald Trump's State of the Union address a couple of weeks ago, where he talked about manifest destiny of the stars, okay, and going into space, and basically talking about conquering space. I think he mentioned going to Mars, etc. Right? He has this space wars, this new initiative in space. The term manifest destiny goes back to 1845 from a journalist named John O'Sullivan. And this is the year before the Mexican-American War starts. And John L. O'Sullivan, the editor of a magazine that served as an organ for the Democratic Party and of a partisan newspaper, first wrote of manifest destiny 1845. But at the time, he did not think the words were profound. Rather than being coined, the phrase was buried halfway through the third paragraph of a long essay in the July-August issue of the United States Magazine and Democratic Review on the necessity of annexing Texas and the inevitability of American expansion. Okay, this is dealing with over territory, all right, and wanting to take Texas as U.S. territory. So John L. O'Sullivan was protesting European meddling in American affairs, especially by France and England, which he said were acting, quote, for the avowed object of thwarting our policy and hampering our power, limiting our greatness and checking the fulfillment of our manifest destiny, to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions, end quote. So manifest destiny dealt with this theory. It dealt with the expansion and the desire of the U.S. to take over this entire North American continent. And you're dealing with land that was still under British control. So we're gonna see like a territory like Oregon, things like this. You're dealing with land that was part of Mexico, because this is so the territories that are California, Arizona, New Mexico, things like this. That's Mexican territory. Okay, so their operating manifest destiny was this concept that of U.S. expansion to take over this entire North American continent. So John L. O'Sullivan's observation was a complaint rather than a call for aggression, and he referred to demography rather than pugnacity as the solution to the perceived problem of European interference. Democrats took up manifest destiny as a slogan. The phrase frequently appeared in debates relating to the territory of Oregon, sometimes as soaring rhetoric and other times as sarcastic derision. As an example of the latter, on February 6, 1846, the New Hampshire Statesman and State Journal, a Whig newspaper. So the Whig was a political party that existed before the Republican Party existed, because at this time, 1846, the Democratic Party at this time, the what we know as the Democratic Party basically comes into existence in 1828. They were known as Jacksonian Democrats, named after President Andrew Jackson. 1846, the Republican Party doesn't exist. They're not founded to 1854. Okay. So these are two entirely different parties back then, because there's going to be that party realignment that takes place after the Voting Rights Act of 65 and the Civil Rights Act of 64. There's going to be this party realignment that's going to take place. And the party realignment, the foundation of that party realignment is going to go back to the 1920s, and it goes back to the Lily White movement of 1928, where Republicans are trying to get Herbert Hoover elected as president. So they start ignoring the concerns of African Americans, and they ignore the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And they appealed to 5 Southern former Confederate states to get the Southern segregationist Dixiecrats to vote for Herbert Hoover, a Republican, as president. And they start pushing African Americans out of the Republican Party. Okay, this was the Lily White movement in 1928. So a lot of people think that African Americans switched to the Democratic Party because of the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65. Well, by 1960, 2/3 had already switched over to the Democratic Party, because that shift goes back like 4 decades prior. So this is why you have to really understand the chronology of history. And then you're going to have Southern segregationist Dixiecrats who are going to leave the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party. So the mentalities, a lot of the mentalities of the two parties you're going to have this party realignment that takes place. So even though a lot of people look at the last straw as Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona running in 1964 for president. No, that party the seeds of that party realignment and that shift, we see that going back 4 decades prior. Okay, how's everybody doing? This is a deep history, and all this history ties into policy and politics. So this is why I'm telling people, a lot of people talking about a Black agenda, okay? I'm all for that, but a Black agenda is what we present to the candidates. That's not what they present to us. But you have to understand history, law, and policy. You have to understand history, law, and politics, and policies that exist and the impact that policies have had on you, which ties into history. You have to understand that to be able to put together a sensible agenda. So oftentimes a Black agenda becomes something abstract that people say, oh, they want people to present to us. We want candidates to present a Black agenda to us. No, we should be focused on putting together a Black agenda and presenting it to all the candidates. Many people have it backwards, but that's another conversation. Okay. All right. I want to make sure I get through my notes here. So just bear with me for a minute here. And being that this is African American History Month, we have my Black History Month DVD bundle packs available right now at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. 15 DVD bundle pack, includes a lot of my lectures dealing with history. It's on sale now. Let's say it's $100. It's like a $250 value. The Michael Imhotep Black History Month DVD bundle packs. We'll post a link here, and it's right on the home page of our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Look at the comments coming from Michael Bloomberg, and I'm going to do a separate broadcast on this. Look at when he was talking, made the comments in 2000, I think it was 2008 or 5 years ago, so 2015, dealing with redlining, and predatory loans, go read those full statements and then go study what happened with the mortgage crisis in this country. Because redlining was created by the federal government. That goes back to about 1934. And banks were pushing predatory loans to African Americans after there was pressure put on banks to end the redlining process. Banks are pushing predatory loans to African Americans and taking advantage of us, and pushing predatory loans to Hispanics as well, and taking advantage of us. And oftentimes African Americans qualified for traditional loans and better interest rates, and we would still push towards predatory loans. Okay? So a lot of people, see, this is why you have to read past the headlines, read past the first two paragraphs. And this is why you have to really, this ties into history once again. Because a lot of people don't want to talk about how the banks were taking advantage of African Americans and saddling us with predatory loans, and how we lost a lot of wealth because we lost our homes. In that recession, we lost like 53% of our wealth, because the majority of our wealth was tied to our homes. Okay. And a lot of people don't want to talk about this and don't want to deal with the fact that the redlining that Bloomberg was talking about, the redlining that Joe Biden was talking about, all that stuff, the redlining was a system created by the federal government coming from the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was created in 1933. Okay, so a lot of times people they just want to talk about bits and pieces of this, but don't want to take, wait a second, the federal government created that. And they created this policy that was adopted by the insurance companies and the real estate agencies, and they discriminated against African Americans as well as Hispanics. So I find it interesting how people just want to take bits and pieces of this, right? But don't want to tell you, well, hold on, wait a second. The banks exploited African Americans. This is why Congress was cracking down on the banks using redlining. They're cracking down on this, and they don't want to really deal with all this history. So I'm telling you, so to understand policy, you got to understand history. This is deep. Law and policies intersect. Law and history intersect. All right. Let's see who we have here. We got, okay, Ms. Britton, Danny, Kofi. How's everybody doing? Anybody on here in Chicago? Speaking at Chicago State University, Saturday, February 15th. Event is 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Organized by the Black Mall. So visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there. All right, let's continue here. Now, if we look at, we'll look at two things here briefly. Let's look at the Mexican-American War, okay? Because the Mexican-American War is going to happen 1846 to 1848, about 20 years or so after Mexico declares its independence, well, after Vicente Guerrero abolishes slavery, right? When we look at the causes of the Mexican-American War, Texas gained its independence from Mexico in 1836. Initially, the United States declined to incorporate Texas into the Union, largely because Northern political interests were against the addition of a new slave state, because slavery was existing in Texas. The Mexican government also, the Mexican government was also encouraging border raids and warning that any attempt at annexation would lead to war. Okay. Now, gold is going to be discovered in California just days before Mexico ceded the land of California to the United States in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So annexation procedures were quickly initiated after the 1844 election of President James L. Polk, P-O-L-K, who campaigned that Texas should be re-annexed and that the Oregon Territory should be reoccupied. Okay. So President James Polk also had his eyes on California, New Mexico, and the rest of what is today the U.S. Southwest. When his offers to purchase those lands were rejected, he instigated a fight by moving troops, U.S. troops, into a disputed zone between the Rio Grande and Nueces River, N-U-E-C-E-S, that both countries had previously recognized as part of the Mexican state, as part of a Mexican territory. Okay, so he's moving. See, all this fight was dealing with disputes over land, and you have the U.S. expanding, trying to expand territory, acquire new land, etc. And this is going to lead to the Mexican-American War. So a lot of people don't know that the U.S. went to war with Mexico. Okay. And then when you look at history.com has another really good article dealing with the Southern Underground Railroad. And the Southern Underground Railroad was the Underground Railroad running through the South into Mexico. And it's estimated that 5,000 to 10,000 runaway slaves ran away and they go into Mexico. Okay, so this is why the Texas Rangers are formed as bounty hunters, going in hired by Texas slave owners to go into Mexico to bring back their property. Let's see here. So Mexican-American War is going to take place. We're going to see the war is going to be declared May 13th, 1846. The U.S. is going to declare war on Mexico. And when we look at the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, guerrilla attacks against U.S. supply lines continued, but for all intents and purposes, the war had ended. Finally, on February 2nd, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, establishing the Rio Grande and not the Nueces River as the U.S.-Mexican border. So today, the Rio Grande is the border between the U.S. and Mexico. Under the treaty, Mexico also recognized the U.S. annexation of Texas and agreed to sell California and the rest of its territory north of the Rio Grande for $15 million, plus the assumption of certain damage claims. Now, we know that 1781, the city of Los Angeles is founded in California. There was about 44 or so people who founded the city of Los Angeles. About half of them were Afro-Mexicans. So this is a deep history, okay? And right now, what you're dealing with is the fear of the browning of America. The fear that by the year 2043, white people will no longer be a majority population in this country. And not all white people are afraid of that, but some of them are. A lot of them are Donald Trump. A lot of them are Donald Trump supporters. So if we look at the article from New York Times, and this is information coming from the U.S. Census Bureau. If we look at this article, fewer births than deaths among whites in majority of U.S. states. Fewer births than deaths among whites in majority of U.S. states. This is from June 20th, 2018. I've talked about this in a number of my lectures and presentations. Deaths now outnumber births among white people in more than half the states in the country. Demographers have found, signaling what could be a faster than expected transition to a future in which whites are no longer a majority of the US population. The Census Bureau has projected that whites could drop below 50% of the population around the year 2045, but it's been accelerated to the year 2043. A relatively slow-moving change that has been years in the making. But a new report this week found that, so this is from June 2018, okay? So this report came out back then. But a new report this week found that whites are dying faster than they are being born now in 26 states out of 50, up from just 17 states just 2 years prior. And demographers say that shift might come even sooner. Okay, so read this article from the New York Times. And this has a lot of people afraid for a number of different reasons. Okay, I'm not saying all white people fear this. Some of them do. The Fox News network and a lot of right-wing conservative media are feeding fear to people, right? And then, you know, the other thing that is important to understand is that let's see, how should I put this? The people who people want to call Mexicans, right? They never left. They never left the land. This is the other thing, all right? When we have these conversations and we deal with these disputes over land, and a lot of what's taking place now is a continuation of all this stuff, right? You have to understand history and understand the chronology of history. The other thing is Mexico was conquered by Spain. A lot of people will have, so Spanish is the dominant language in Mexico, right? There's 68 languages spoken in Mexico. Spanish is the dominant language because you have a lot of indigenous languages that are spoken. One of the side effects or one of the remnants of colonialism is taking on attributes of your colonizer. The same thing with us here in this country, right? This was conquered by the English. African Americans speak English because we were conquered by the English. The dominant language in dominant language in Mexico is Spanish because they were conquered by the Spanish. $ the AHN show in Cash App, Linda. $ the AHN show in Cash App. We'll post it here again. Okay. Thanks. So a lot of these issues that take place, we have to look at it holistically. Okay. What I really find interesting is that take Trump, for instance, right? Who wants to demonize undocumented immigrants. And what he doesn't want to tell you is that the reports from his own departments like Homeland Security show that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at a much lower rate than people born here in this country. If he really wanted to do something to crack down on undocumented immigrants, what he would do is go after the corporations and the farmers who hired them. If you really wanted to do something about it. But he's not doing that because he's one of them. So if you so let's look at it like this, right? A lot of people don't know that privatized prison companies were losing money under President Obama because U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years in December of 2015. And that's coming from, not from me, that's coming from the Department of Justice. Okay, Newsweek.com has an article about this, dealing with the U.S. prison population dropping to its lowest point in 20 years. There's a link to the press release from the Department of Justice that talks about this. It dropped down to 1.53 million. There are articles going back to 2015 and 2016 showing how privatized prison companies were losing money under President Obama because the U.S. prison population was dropping. August of 2016, Sally Yates, who was with the Department of Justice, and we know Sally Yates got fired by Trump, right? Remember when she exposed Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, okay, in early 2017? In August of 2016, Sally Yates, part of the Obama Department of Justice, announced that the Department of Justice was not going to renew contracts, federal contracts for privatized prisons. The day that announcement came out, Core Civic and Geo Group, two of the largest owner-operators of privatized prisons in the country, they took a big hit. Their stock prices took a big hit. So if you go back and look at articles back at that time, you'll see articles talking about how the privatized prison companies were losing money under President Obama. Core Civic and Geo Group donated almost $600,000 to Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. They donated almost $600,000 to Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, okay? I'm not sure how many people know this or like pay attention to this. And I'm pulling up an article here to show you this here. Which one is this one here? So Trump gets in office and he announces that so he reverses President Obama's initiative to close privatized prisons. So for instance, newsone.com has an article, Jeff Sessions dismantles Obama era directive to close private prisons. All right. Follow the money. Follow the money. Because they were losing money under President Obama, these privatized prison companies started turning towards what? Housing migrants who are coming through the Mexican border, coming here. And they're getting government contracts to house migrants in facilities. So we just posted that article here. Jeff Sessions dismantles Obama era directive to close private prisons. CNN has one that deals with private prison stocks up 100% since Trump wins, February 24, 2017. Private prison stocks up 100% since Trump's win, February 24, 2017. Thanks to Donald Trump, America's private prisons appear to be entering a golden age, a gold age. The stocks of the two biggest private prison operators, Core Civic, formerly known as Corrections Corporation of America, and Geo Group, have doubled since Election Day. Core Civic, their stock exchange symbol is CXW, is up 140% since Trump won in November. Geo Group has risen 98%. Now these two companies donated almost $600,000 to Donald Trump's presidential campaign because they're losing money under President Obama. And Trump favors privatized prisons. So Trump reverses Obama's initiative to end the federal government's usage of privatized prisons. Read this article. Elections have consequences. This is what happens when you don't understand history and don't understand policies. Okay? So then they started shifting and getting more contracts to house migrants coming to this country. New York Times has a article here Let's see here. The billion-dollar business of operating shelters for migrant children. The billion-dollar business for operating shelters for migrant children. They have one here, and then there's another one. There's another one that deals with Geo Group, and let's see. Wall Street Journal. Trump's immigrant detention plans benefit private prison operators. July 2nd, 2018. Trump's immigrant detention plans benefit private prison operators. Core Civic, Geo Group, both Trump campaign contributors, have become more reliant on ICE revenue in recent years. Okay. Let me see. They're trying to block me from reading this one. Let's go. See, what I'm explaining to you, you have to understand history, policies, and law, and you have to follow the money. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. In 2017, illegal border crossings at the southern border were at a 20-year low. I'm sorry, they were at a 40-year low. They're at a 40-year low. Illegal border crossings at the southern border were at a 40-year low in 2017. Under Trump, because of his rhetoric, because of him ignoring the reports coming from Homeland Security, dealing with how climate change is negatively impacting the environment and agriculture and farming in Central American countries. And then also, if you go to NBCnews.com and search for climate change and migrants, they have information there. But the other thing that Trump did was President Obama increased the amount of aid going to certain Central American countries so that more of those people would stay there and not come here. What did Trump do? He took away that aid, which exacerbated the conditions in Central American countries. So more of them were coming here. But that benefits Core Civic and Geo Group because they're getting these multi-million-dollar contracts to house the migrants. So people are not following the money on this. This is what I'm explaining to people. No, you have to follow the money. Let me find this. Let me find this article. I think it's in one of my recent stacks here because I want you to read this. Because this is what I was explaining to people. This is what I was explaining to people in 2016. And I was warning people about Trump and how crazy he is. And I was breaking this stuff down, and people did not understand in 2016. If you go back and listen to my podcast, we have almost 1,000 of them at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Go back and listen to my podcast of 2016 when I was doing nationally syndicated radio 5 days a week. I was warning you about Trump, and people didn't understand. Read this one here, National Public Radio. Where does illegal immigration mostly occur? Here's what the data tells us. Page 2. Because see, 60% of undocumented immigrants come here legally and overstay their visas. They're not running across the southern border. 60% come here legally and overstay their visas. Visa overstays are a bigger problem than people running across the southern border. Very few people know this. When it comes to people in the country without proper documentation, the majority of them did not cross the Mexican border at all. Most of them came to the United States legally, but then did not leave. About 700,000 travelers to the United States overstayed their visas in fiscal year 2017, the most recent year for which the Department of Homeland Security had published figures. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, estimated that as of September 30th, 2017, the end of that fiscal year, more than 600,000 of those travelers were still in the United States. During that same year, there were just 300,000 apprehensions along the southern border, according to Customs and Border Patrol. the lowest number since 1971. During that same year, there were just 300,000 apprehensions along the southern border, according to CBP, Customs and Border Protection, I should say. The lowest since 1971. Read this article, npr.org, January 10th, 2019. Where does illegal immigration mostly occur? Here's what the data tells us. We also see an increasing number of migrants coming through Central America, coming from African nations like the Congo, Angola, Cameroon, different African nations like that. New York Times, a new migrant surge at the border. This one from Central Africa. A new migrant surge at the border. This one from Central Africa, June 16th, 2019. There was one I was looking for, and it's not coming up in my bookmarks because it's dealing with the privatized prisons. And this is extremely important because, see, as we crack down on privatized prisons in the country, so we know that the state of California under Governor Gavin Newsom, they outlaw privatized prisons. They abolished them in, I think it's like October of 2019. So as more states move to abolish privatized prisons, they're going to look for another source of income, another source of revenue. So where are they going to look? Let me see. Do I have it here? It's one of these, man. I got like thousands of articles. And I had all those together, so I'm not sure why I can't find it right now. Let me try one more time to pull this up here. I think it was New York Times, this other one. US Face. Just give me a second here. Let's see, which one is that? Well, I can't find it now, but if you, I'm not sure why that's not coming up. Maybe it was Washington Post. This is another one here. I think this is an important one. This is from October 25th, 2017. It's not the one I'm looking for, but this will do. You remember a few months ago, remember in 2019, Donald Trump was looking at having the G7 meeting at his resort called Doral in Florida. You remember that? If you look at this article from Washington Post, private prison giant, resurgent in Trump era, gathers at president's resort. Private prison giant, resurgent in Trump era, gathers at president's resort. October 25th, 2017. In recent years, the private prison company Geo Group has held its annual leadership conference at venues near its Boca Raton headquarters. But this year, the company moved its gathering to a Miami area golf resort owned by Donald Trump. The event last week, during which executives and wardens gathered for 4 days of meetings, dinner receptions, and golf outings at the luxurious 800-acre Trump national doral, followed an intense effort by Geo Group to align itself with Donald Trump and his administration. Now, this is a privatized prison company that gets contracts to house migrants coming through the southern border. During last year's election, during the 2016 election, a company subsidiary gave $225,000 to a pro-Trump super PAC. Geo Group gave an additional $250,000 to Donald Trump's inaugural committee. It also hired an outside lobbyist, a major Trump fundraiser, and two former aides to Attorney General Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, one of the president's most prominent campaign backers, Jeff Sessions, who became his Attorney General. Geo Group, meanwhile, has had newfound success in Trump's Washington. The company secured the administration's first contract for an immigration detention center, a deal worth tens of millions of dollars a year. This is a privatized prison company securing a contract. They secured the Trump administration's first contract for an immigration detention center. Follow the money. And Geo Group's stock price has tripled since hitting a low in 2016 when the Obama administration sought to phase out the use of private prisons, a decision that Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, Donald Trump's first Attorney General, reversed. Well, hold on. I thought it didn't matter who you voted for. Geo Group's achievements over the past year show how a company that has long relied heavily on doing business with the federal government and whose business model was under threat is thriving in the Trump administration, the Trump era. Remember Donald Trump asked Black people, what the hell do you have to lose? We didn't understand what was at stake in 2016. This is why I was explaining to people. People thought I was playing games. No, I do research. Even as the president has targeted lobbyists and Washington special interests with his vow to quote unquote drain the swamp. Remember that? Drain the swamp. Geo Group has regained its footing while escalating its spending on traditional tactics such as lobbying and campaign donations. The Doral event represents a potential avenue of influence that is unique to Trump, the chance for a corporation to engage in a private business transaction with the president. This was in 2017. Read this article. Private prison giant resurgent in Trump era gathers at president's resort. See, all this is going on, right? All this is going on right in front of our eyes. Now, most people don't even know the impact that Trump has had on privatized prisons. I remember in August of 2016, when the Obama administration made that announcement and the stock price of Geo Group and Core Civic took a big hit because I was following this stuff. So while people are still talking about Gail and Oprah, you know, all right, whatever. Justice Department will again use private prisons. February 23rd, 2017. Justice Department will again use private prisons. The Justice Department will once again use private prisons to house federal inmates, reversing an Obama-era directive to stop using the facilities which officials had then deemed less safe and less effective than those run by the government. In a one-paragraph memo, Attorney Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III rescinded the previous directive to the Bureau of Prisons to either reduce or decline the to either reduce or decline to renew private prison contracts as they came due. What the hell do you have to lose? Isn't this what the trader-in-chief asked us? So read that article also. Washington Post. Justice Department will again use private prisons. So you can't run around here talking about the First Step Act, but you don't want to deal with this and deal with the fact that Trump's Department of Justice has backed away from holding police departments accountable and backed away from using investigating the patterns and practices into police departments, and backed away from using consent decrees. That's what Jeff Sessions did, a total reversal from the Obama Department of Justice. So all this ties into history, ties into law, ties into politics, everything. Let me see here. I'm trying to find this other article here. I really think it was a New York Times article. Just 1 second here. Let me try. All right, how's everybody doing? Hey, be sure to listen to the African History Network show Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF. You know, we broadcast on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network also. Okay, one was New York Times. I think I got that. The $1 billion business of operating shelters for migrant children. We got that. Let me try to pull this up a different way. I think this is it right here. This is another one from the New York Times. Is this the right one? For private prisons, detaining immigrants is big business. For private prisons, detaining immigrants is big business. A surging inmate population in the 1980s led to a boom led to a boom in for-profit prisons. Today, privately run prisons have become the government's default detention centers for undocumented migrants. This is October 1st, 2018. They talk about Corrections Corporation of America, which is now Core Civic. So read that one. It's not the one I was looking for, but okay. All right. So email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. We have a couple new advertisers here. So a lot of people want to get into shape. We know African-American women do work out. We know a lot of African-American men and women want to get into shape for 2020. And SheRanHerselfFit.com can help with this. Now, She Ran Herself Fit's mission is to inspire and motivate women to take healthy lifestyle changes. She Ran Herself Fit is a brand that promotes women living a healthy lifestyle. By making small sacrifices in our daily routine and changing our diet, we can combat many of the different diseases that are prevalent in the African-American community. The owner of She Ran Herself Fit lost over 200 pounds by changing her diet and running. Her name is Felicia. And you go to her website, you see before and after pictures, so you see she knows what she's talking about, and she looks good too. Running may not be your motivation, but find what drives you to be fit. She Ran Herself Fit apparel can be purchased at SheRanHerselfFit.com. So also in 2020, a lot of people want to get their credit in order. You may want to buy a house. may want to get a car loan, etc. So RRR Credit Services and Chandranet Middleton can help you with this. Are you tired of having poor credit? Are you tired of paying those high double-digit interest rates? Would you like to purchase your dream home one day? If the answer is yes to any of these questions, call rrrservices.com, 1-800-607-1989, 1-800-607-1989, or visit their website, rrrcreditservices.com, rrrcreditservices.com. They equip you by providing solutions which will enable you to rebuild your financial future. The affordable cost to becoming a new client is just $30 for the first month. And they also offer a free consultation as well. Give them a call, 1-800-607-1989, and either Chandranet or one of her assistants will help you also. All right, let's look at some of your comments here. Let's see. Trump wants no more catch and release. Yeah, but he hasn't gotten rid of catch and release, actually. Go look at the fact checking from the Washington Post from the State of the Union address 2020. B.L. Carter said, and the employers were untouched. That's why they weren't being, yeah. See, this is what I'm saying. If you wanted to really crack down on that, he would go after the employers. He would go after the corporations that employ them, the farmer. Because the fact of the matter is, I'm just going to be honest with you, right? Maybe you would do it, but I don't know too many people that want to go out and pick oranges and pick strawberries and pick blueberries. I'm just being honest with you. You may do it in 70-degree weather, but not in 100-degree weather. Okay. So if they're really, if Trump was really serious about it, he would crack down on the corporations that hire them. He would crack down on the farmers that rely on migrant workers. But he ain't gonna do that because because be honest with you, he knows if he did that, the economy will collapse. So these become talking points. Okay. These become talking points, and he uses them as political props. Because what he doesn't want to do is he doesn't want. So let's look at this. He doesn't want to deal with how U.S. policies to Central American countries for the last 500 years, for the last 50 years to 100 years, have helped create the conditions in these Central American countries that people are fleeing from. It's like the chickens coming home to roost. He don't want to deal with none of that stuff. Okay. Because when you look at his policies, you look at how climate change and how Trump ignored the report dealing with climate change coming from Homeland Security, how his rhetoric has exacerbated a lot of this, because what happened was part of the influx coming through Central America and then into Mexico trying to come to the US was Trump's rhetoric. And people didn't know if he was going to shut down the border or what have you. So more people started coming. But what most people don't know, illegal border crossings at the southern border were at a 40-year low in 2017. This whole thing is not something that had to happen. Vox.com has a good article, and this ties right into history. This one is, I think it's Vice.com. Was it Vice? I think it was Vice.com because I was just looking at it yesterday. So this is why you have to look at all this holistically. See, we oftentimes we try to compartmentalize things and don't understand how this is a small piece to a larger puzzle. No, you have to look at this holistically. Now, understand history, law, and policy. The violence Central American migrants are fleeing was by the U.S. This is from June 28th, 2018. The violence Central American migrants are fleeing was stoked by the U.S. We're still dealing with the aftermath of atrocities committed by U.S. allies in Central America during the Cold War. So they have a picture of Ronald Reagan holding up a shirt saying, "Stop Communism, Central America." One of the things they mentioned is in 1954, when the CIA moved in on Guatemala to overthrow the president of Guatemala, and how that helped to destabilize Guatemala. In 1954, the CIA helped organize a military coup to overthrow Guatemala's democratically elected government and continued to train the Guatemalan military well into the 1970s. They mentioned the, was that Nicaragua? I'll post this link here. Go read this article though. Yeah, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. As courts, law enforcement, and the Trump administration continue to sort out what to do with the steady stream of migrants either crossing the southern border illegally or seeking asylum, the roots of the current misery are often forgotten. The desperate border crossings often come from Central America's northern triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and are fleeing high homicide rates and violence in those countries. But this instability did not arise in a vacuum. Many historians and policy experts are quick to point out that much of the troubles in Central America were created or at least helped by the US government's interference in those countries going back decades. In other words, the foreign policy of the past has profoundly shaped the present immigration crisis. Elizabeth Oglesby, an associate professor of Latin American studies at the University of Arizona, said, quote, hundreds of thousands of people were displaced in the 1980s, end quote. People were fleeing violence and massacres and political persecution that the United States was either funding directly or at the very minimum covering up and excusing, end quote. Violence today in those countries, she said, is a direct legacy of US involvement. So when we looked at a couple months ago, Trump killed Soleimani, the Iranian general, killed him on foreign soil in Iraq. And then it came up because of history. 1953, the CIA and British intelligence overthrows the democratically elected president of Iran. And this helps to destabilize Iran. 1961, CIA overthrows Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. 1954, the CIA overthrows the democratically elected government in Guatemala. Read this article, because you have to understand history, law, and policies, okay? Because one of the biggest mistakes people make is they think that what they're seeing today is something that happened in a vacuum and is not related to a sequence of previous events. Okay, let's see here. Let's post this one here. Check that out. The violent Central American migrants are fleeing was stoked by the US. And then you look at, you got an increase in number of African migrants coming through Central America as well. And some of them are being caught up in those prisons also, the detention centers. And then we just saw that Trump added more African nations to the immigration ban list, Nigeria, Eritrea, and some other ones. This largely ties into 2043 and the fear of the browning of America. Now, I'm not saying all white people don't fear that, but a lot of them do, okay, for various reasons. Okay, let's see, we have BL, exactly, to help destabilize many countries, yeah. Truth be told, yep. So I'm saying, dude, we got to, you know, these are some crazy times. Right now, dude, that's what I'm telling you. This 2020 election, the November 3rd, 2020 election, this is critical. Because this fool is off the chain. He is totally unhinged. And these cowardly Republicans in the Senate who stood on the Senate floor during the impeachment trial when they were right before they took the vote, and they were saying whether or not they were going to vote to impeach him. These cowardly senators, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, who's retiring and should resign today, Senator Marco Rubio, a lot of other senators. Only one Republican senator, Senator Mitt Romney, had courage, and that was only half of courage, because on the second count dealing with obstruction of Congress, he voted against that, but he voted to remove him from office for abuse of power. They stood on the Senate floor and talked and said what Trump did was inappropriate, what he did was wrong. Senator Lamar Alexander said we don't need to hear from witnesses because the House managers, the Democrats and the House representatives, they proved their case. And they were too cowardly to remove him from office. And now he's totally unhinged. If this fool gets reelected to the second term, you don't want to see what America's going to look like. I'm telling you right now. All right, guys. Hey, email us customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. And also, we promote your business in our Facebook Live videos, our YouTube videos. But we also put your 30-second and 60-second commercial into the audio podcast of all of our broadcasts as well. We're on 8 different audio podcast platforms. We're on Castbox, Acast, iTunes, FM Player, TuneIn, Stitcher. Okay. So our current promotion is buy 1 month, get 2 months free. Email us today, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll get you up and running today. Okay. My current, we know this is African American History Month. My current, we have the 15 DVD Black History Month bundle pack. That's on sale right now. It's regularly $100. Well, it's regularly about $200, $250 on sale, $100 right now at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. So you can order that today. We have those shipping out this weekend. Let's see, those in Chicago. Hey, I'm speaking at Chicago State University for the Black Malls Ujima Marketplace coming up Saturday, February 15th, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's a free event open to the public. They're going to have workshops. I'll be speaking. They'll have speakers, martial arts demonstrations. Visit theblackmall.com, theblackmall.com for more information also. And then we have we have it at our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com as well. Okay, BL. Okay, how you doing, BL? Let's see, Linda. Let's see here. Truth be told, how you doing? Truth be told. Yeah, so we have to really understand history. And the other thing is that, see, white supremacy pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight one another. So the 1% or 5% or 10% stay in power while they're exploiting everybody. Okay. When you study the history of the Mexican-American War, 1846, 1848, you study the history of Texas fighting against Mexico, all this stuff over land, but it's also over the resources. Okay. And then this ties into the history of slavery in this country as well. So this is a deep history. All right. Let's see, Sandra. Okay. So everybody, follow us here on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. If you notice a lot of my topics, I don't deal with a lot of these topics. This is not against anybody. I just need to say this. A lot of these BS topics that a lot of people deal with, I don't deal with, because I'm studying us sliding into a dictatorship. I'm looking at what this fool is doing with the Department of Justice and turning the Department of Justice, he's weaponizing the Department of Justice. I mean, this is similar to what J. Edgar Hoover did with the counterintelligence program. Okay. This is similar to what Richard Nixon did with his enemies list. So a lot of this other superfluous nonsense, I don't even deal with. I don't have time to. There's some serious things going on right here. Okay, guys, look, hey, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. If you want to donate to the African History Network, you can do it through Cash App or PayPal. That really helps. It helps us finance the research, pay the bills, stay on the air, finance our Sunday night show. $ the AHN show through Cash App, because we recently got Cash App. A lot of people were asking me to get Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. And then also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. You can order my DVD lectures as well. That helps supports us also. Okay. All right, hey, look, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Remember, right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.